Okay, welcome everybody to today's lecture on attention. So, we will start with a brief introduction into attention, and then I have just two major topics today. One are to go through a couple of models of attention, and the final one is about automaticity. Okay, let's start. Who knows the movie The Legend of Bagger Vance? Nobody. Okay, so it's a quieter movie, but it's actually not that bad. So it's about that Matt Damon plays a golfer who was quite good actually, then had to go to First World War, came back and was pushed to join a tournament with two other professional golfers because he was kind of the local hero. And he really doesn't play very good and really doesn't find his game. And he has this kind of mysterious trainer in the form of Will Smith who guides him to play golf. So let's have a look at a scene from that movie.
Oh yes, greatest game there is. Right, Hardy?
Yes, sir. The greatest game that will ever be.
Just you and the ball.
All by your lonesome. I think it's time.
Time for what?
Time for you to see the field.
The field? I see the field. It's 445 yards long. It's got a little red flag at the end of it. It's 12 strokes ahead of me.
That ain't it. Because if you seen the field, you wouldn't be hacking at that ball like you was chopping weeds out from under your front porch.
Just give me the club.
It's not a problem. Hey, you won't take that hack away.
What's the field?
Fix your eyes on Bobby Jones.
He's a piece of work right now. Uh-oh, need a man room. Knock it out there, Bob.
Just practice, man. Almost like it's searching for something. Then he finds it. Until he set this up right into the middle of it. Feel that focus. He got a lot of shots he could choose from. Duffs and tops and skulls. There's only one shot that's in perfect harmony with the field. One shot that's his. Authentic shot. And that shot is going to choose him. There's a perfect shot out there trying to find each and every one of us. What we got to do is get ourselves out of its way. Let it choose us. Look at him. He in the field. You can't see that flag as some dragon you got to slay. At the look with soft eyes. See the place where the tides and the seasons and the turning of the earth all come together. And everything that is becomes one. You got to seek that place which is so joy. ain't just watching in your head, ever won't be. I can't take you there, Junior. Just hopes I can help you find a way. Just you, that ball, that flag, and all you are, seek it with your hands. Don't think about it. Feel it. Looking at it, Junior. Feel it. It's just you, one shot, that's incredible. Ball, you can see it. It's the home of your authentic flame. That flag, and all that you are. Okay. So what does that have to do with attention? Anybody, any idea?
Is it the concept of the bottleneck filter?
Sorry?
No, the bottleneck filter when you're filtering out information.
It's jumping quite a bit ahead, yes. Concept of a bottleneck, but a little bit more basic. What did he do basically? Focus. He focused. And when you watch the movie closely, then you have seen that the movie makers also used an element which is also part of an attention. When he was using the swing and the focus was in, there was no crowd next to him. He was just standing there without the crowd. So with the focus usually comes that we lose track of everything else which is outside the focus. And this concept of attention is basically has been put forward very early already by William James, who was one of the big American very first psychologists probably, and he wrote a book, Principles of Psychology, in 1890. So quite a time before we all had the experimental evidence. And you can say that for a lot of things in cognitive psychology, you find a very good first definition by William James, although he didn't do many studies himself. So he starts his description of attention with, everybody knows what attention is. And in a way, everybody does know, but often it's a little bit difficult to find a good definition of that. So he wrote, "It is the taking possession of the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. Focalization, concentration of consciousness are of its essence. It implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others." So we have this concept here, which is still element of modern definitions of attention. So we have several options, things where we could put our attention on. However, we pick one out of that, and that's where we put our attention on then. So we focus, we concentrate, and as well we have this withdrawal from other things. So when we don't pay attention to something, it will be very hard to remember and to process, if not impossible. So a modern day definition is pretty much along the same lines. Attention is the cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one aspect of the external or internal environment while ignoring other aspects. External or internal refers to external word, obviously our senses to the outside, vision, audition, everything, and internal we can feel in our body, whether we are hungry or thirsty or have pain somewhere. We could put our attention there. And the real proper research on attention started only quite late in the 1950s with the rise of cognitive psychology, actually. So attention is a very central topic in perception, what we spoke about last week. And when you think about a visual scene, just like this lecture theater, is so rich in detail. We have so many things to look at that this is really, you might say, an overload in information. And actually, when you look there and a little bit closer at this, then we often don't notice the details of everything around us unless we actually do pay attention to it. So as a little demonstration, can I ask you to close your eyes? I won't throw water bottles or anything at you, so you can really trust me. Just close your eyes. It doesn't hurt. Nothing. Okay. So with your closed eyes, please try to answer the following question. Some of them are easy, I hope. What's the color of my shirt? Keep your eyes closed here, and don't say them, okay? Everybody can make a note of that for themselves and then check in a moment. Keep your eyes closed. What's the color of the shirt, jumper, or something of the person sitting next to you? You can choose left or right. I hope it's not your boy or girlfriend and you start a fight about this, like, oh, you didn't notice. Okay, third one and last one. On your mobile phone, you know that at the bottom you have a series of icons which is always fixed there. Which is the rightmost item of that? It's probably different for a lot of people. Okay, so you can open your eyes now again and double check how well you did. And please enter on poll everywhere how many you got right, okay? Okay, let's wait for a moment. I block out the view so that we just see. Go to, that's the web address. If you go there and just tell us how many you got out of this. Okay, you're not too bad. You can continue if you want to. But you see, it's only a third of the people who get all three correct. Although you probably looked at me for a couple of minutes, you sat next to the person for a couple of minutes, and you probably looked at your phone 100 or 1,000 times. But still, you just don't notice, you don't remember these things. And this is illustrating one thing, and this is that usually there is the assumption that, except for a couple of circumstances, things which are outside our attention, which we don't put into a focus of our attention, we don't properly process. We don't put into our memory. We don't become aware of them. So that shows you how fundamental attention is for our everyday life. Okay, so good statistics here. Okay. Another very quick demonstration of where we need attention and where it is difficult to track something in our environment is the so-called flicker paradigm. And this relates to the phenomenon of change blindness. And I'm sure you know some of them. So I will just show one of the paradigms. So there is a rather obvious difference between the two images which are flickering back and forth, and your task is to spot that difference. And once you did so, please just raise your hand so that I can see that you've seen it. So far we have 2, 4, 5, 6, slowly starting. Once you see the change, you don't understand why you didn't see it before, because it's rather obvious. Okay, to speed it up a little bit, look at that car here. So you see that the color is changing between bright and dark. Okay, so I gather most of you have seen it now, and I want to stop that here. There are many examples online where you have even larger changes in an image, which is really hard to see and which very hard to notice. And that again illustrates that a lot of things which we just don't take for granted are not that easy, and that in this example of the flicker paradigm, when we somehow disrupt our typical modes of attention, that some things are really difficult to recognize, to become aware of. So what's the explanation for the flicker paradigm, for this effect here? And the idea is that our typical bottom-up processing, as we spoke about last week in perception, is optimized towards continuous input. And the flickering between the two images, the trick that it's working is that it's not two images just alternating. What you have to do to make it a difficult task is that you have a blank screen, like a gray screen, inserted between that for like 500 milliseconds or so. So you have one image, a brief blank screen, and then the other image. Then again the blank screen, and then the other image. And by this, we disrupt this continuous input. And when we have continuous input, changes are very easily detected. Usually changes are due to motion, and they are highly relevant for us to spot dangers, for instance. So, and when we disrupt that, we disrupt this bottom-up process of that, so we're not able to detect this continuous motion or these changes. And then what we have to do, because we can't rely on this bottom-up process, is this deliberate attentional search. It's a top-down search. So we really have to say, okay, I look at this position and try to look at this for a couple of frames to see whether it's different or not. Okay, then let's look at this difference. So we really have to deliberately search by voluntary controlled top-down attentional control. Okay, so now this change blindness seems really very abstract phenomenon. Now, what do you think? Could you swap the person you're speaking to? So let's say you're talking to somebody, and then, I don't know, unexpectedly a screen goes down, goes up again half a second or a second later, and somebody else is sitting in front of you. What do you think? Does it work or not? If it works, probably not for everyone anyway. So would a considerable proportion of people not recognize that they are talking to a different person? What do you think? Please enter in the poll everywhere poll. Where am I? No. Oh, I have to activate that, sorry. Now you can. I have to hide that. You know Ash's study of conformity, don't you? So we don't want to influence you here. Okay, 50-50 roughly, saying yes and no. Let's have a look. Somebody try to do that as a proper study.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Lavie. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory.
Okay, so it actually can happen in everyday life. Yes?
Does it look like he looked up and seen his face?
Sorry?
It didn't look like he looked up and seen the guy's face. Does that make a difference?
Well, I guess in this one, of course, if you don't physically look at somebody, then it would be more difficult to notice. But I guess the voice is different, the clothing, even if you look down, probably different jumper and stuff. And I wouldn't think that they would think that they had quite a few participants, and not everybody wasn't looking. So that would be a rather trivial finding then. So the interpretation of that is that obviously it seems to be not sufficient to look at something, to really process it consciously and become fully aware of that. And in this example, it is probably that the people were, of course, fully aware they were talking to a person. So if you replace the person by a monkey or something, they would have noticed, I'm sure of that. However, the person didn't pay probably attention to the exact identity. For them, it was just a person, and there was enough encoded, so no more attention to that, and so it was missed. So to transfer that to everyday life, it's very unlikely then when you have a romantic dinner with your partner that you could just swap your partner without you noticing. At least I strongly hope so, unless you're on your mobile phone the whole time or something like that. So, because then you do pay the proper attention to that. Okay, so we have seen that the attention on, or the effects of attention on our perception has real implications for our everyday life. Suppose eyewitness testimony. You have to be aware of these effects to try to evaluate how trustworthy is a report from a person. Driving a car in traffic, for instance, it has been shown that elderly are slower in this change detection. Or human-machine interaction. You don't want certain operators in critical jobs miss important signals because you had a poor interface which made it hard for them to detect. Okay, so far for the introduction. Do you have any questions? Okay, so then let's turn to models of attention. And after having this nice and sweet introduction with video clips, we are now going a little bit more technical and model-wise. Okay, so let's start again with the definition. Attention allows us to focus on one thing while at the same time disregard other stimuli. And the key research questions here are, for instance, which stimuli do we attend to? So how do we pick them? At which level of the processing do we filter out the ones we attend to and the ones we don't attend to? And what happens to the stimuli we don't attend to? So let's have a look at this. And there's one thing which probably most people know about. It's called the cocktail party phenomenon. And that describes that usually when you are at a party or something, that you have no problem to concentrate on the conversation of your peer group while ignore all other conversations. And usually you also can just switch your conversation to another group. So you suddenly ignore the conversation you have just been in and then engage in a new one. Yeah, I know it can be tricky if it's very loud and very busy. Just to give you an idea, this is a picture of a scientific conference, so it can be quite crowded as well. Here these are poster boards where they present that, so if you have big conferences, then you have the same phenomenon here. Okay, so and in the 1950s, a researcher called Sherry wanted to investigate this phenomenon scientifically, and he devised what is called the dichotic listening paradigm. And I know that most of you already heard about this in Marike's lecture, so we go through that a little bit more quickly. Marike and I spoke to each other, rearranged our lectures, but her changes will take effect only from next year on. So you are unfortunately in that position that you have a little bit of doubled up information here. However, this will be from a slightly different perspective and angle, but some of that stuff you will probably have heard of before. So in dichotic listening, what happens is that you get a separate message. You wear headphones and you get different messages to each ear. And what Sherry was interested in, how can you focus on one message and keep out the other message, basically. So this is the setup. However, what Sherry found is that when he took messages to the two ears, where the speaker sounded very similar, so in technical terms, they had similar physical properties in terms of pitch and speed and everything, then participants were not able to separate them. Although the messages were very different in meaning. One can be a children's story, the other one a sports report. But you can't do that. So the conclusion from that is that we seem to use these physical properties to direct our attention and to set up our filters of attention to focus on one message while disregarding other messages. Now follow-up research asked then, okay, how much, when we attend to one message and ignore another message, how much do we retain from the unattended message? And for that, the shadowing task was developed. And the shadowing task may sound quite easy, but it's actually quite difficult to do it really without too many mistakes. So what is done here is that again you wear headphones and you get a different message to each ear. And your task is to overtly repeat one of the two messages. So the experimenter will tell you, okay, repeat the one in the right ear, or in this example, the left ear, overtly at the same time, and you hear something here. The task is difficult because this is continuous input. So like this simultaneous translation, which you sometimes have, you have to listen and to speak at the same time, concurrently. And that makes it very demanding. And so people really focus on here, on this one hand, and don't attend to the other message. So the question now is, what do they remember of this message? They're not aware that they will later on be asked about this ear. They think it's about something else. And what is shown is that it's mostly, again, these physical properties like tonality, pitch, which were noticed. And these are the properties which seem to be used by our filter to filter out what is not relevant. However, participants did not notice anything of the meaning of the message. They couldn't remember anything. They could change the language. So suddenly it switches from English to German and back to English. They don't notice. The voice can actually change from male to female as long as they roughly keep the tonality the same. Even that is not changed by the not realized by the participants. You can do it in reverse speech. So it's actually not language anymore. It's like a tape played backwards. Again, not noticed by people. So this is evidence, very strong evidence, that if we don't attend to something, we filter that out very early in our processing and don't become aware of that. Because there's really nothing which you could call here higher level processing, which seems to have taken place. And the first person to suggest such an early selection model was Donald Broadbent. So in this example, you have the inputs. You have an attended message in one ear, and the other ear is an unattended message. And according to his model, this information first gets into a sensory store, which holds this information very briefly only, a couple of 100 milliseconds, not more. And from the sensory store, the information is passed forward to a selective filter. And based on these studies of the shadowing task of Cherry, it is proposed that this filter works on physical properties. So really on a very low level, that doesn't sound like the voice I'm attending to, so it filtered out. And then, so this constitutes the bottleneck which was mentioned already, and only the attended message is passed on to higher level processing. Processing for meaning, storage and memory, putting it into working memory, things like that. So, am I going too fast through this?
A little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. As I said, I thought you all heard that already in Marike's module. Okay, good. So this is the model, and the important thing here to remember is that the selection is early in the processing, and that you have this bottleneck, and that higher level processing just happens for the attended message, but not for the unattended message. Okay, so which channel do we attend to? So which ear, for instance, or on a larger scale, vision, audition, we can put auditory attention to something and ignore that. And this is partially guided by our voluntary top-down attention. So you can decide, okay, I'm listening to that conversation and not to the other conversation. So that is an active top-down process. But the actual filtering then is a bottom-up, low-level process. We just set the filters in a top-down way. It may also be guided by what is called reflexive attention or external attention. For instance, if we have a salient stimulus, that automatically captures our attention. This is involuntary and bottom-up. So if there's suddenly somebody coming in here, running in with a chainsaw or something, then probably most of you would direct their attention towards that very unexpected event, which is highly salient. Okay, a very brief excursion here, what the concept of salience, or sometimes also called saliency, means. Because we often forget that this is a term which is not necessarily used in everyday language and sometimes a bit specific to psychology. And salience means or describes the quality of an item, can be an object or a person, how it stands out with respect to its neighbors. So it's a comparison. It's always a relative thing. And so you can say it's the contrast between the item and its neighbors. Let's have two examples. So in this example, it's clearly the red A, which has a high saliency, because it has a high difference to all its neighbors, while all the neighbors are quite homogeneous. In this example, it's the black A which is salient. And this shows you why the red A's are not really salient. So it's not a color as such that red is in itself salient, it's the contrast which makes it salient. So here it's the black thing. So in psychology, if we speak of salient stimuli, then we mean these type of stimuli which have a high contrast to a lot of different neighbors and therefore stand out. Okay, let's go back to the filter model of Broadbent. So which channel is attended to? We said it can be guided either top down or bottom up. And which information is attended to? Which conversation do we follow? Or which point in our view do we look? And this is guided by bottom up, by the physical features, like the pitch, the loudness, the brightness of the stimulus, something like that. So we have both working here in our control of attention. And there's quite a bit of studies, it's very complicated to do, where for instance participants are placed in front of a scene and are asked to look at a scene, and their eye movements are recorded. And then to see where exactly do they look and try to analyze that. And for a long time people used like artificial stimuli with colored circles and triangles and squares, and only in the last couple of years people actually use natural scenes and even moving natural scenes like video clips and try to analyze the pattern of looking. So where do most people look and why do they look there? Trying to understand that. It's quite a complex topic actually. Okay, so we said that the stimuli which pass the filter, which go through the bottleneck, they become the focus of attention. And the unattended stimuli are completely disregarded. That's what the model proposes. So everything we don't attend to, we don't become aware of. And that is something we've seen in the beginning as well, like in the door study and this change blindness, that if we really don't pay explicit attention, we are very prone to miss that. And therefore it can also be called or termed an all or nothing filter. Either it gets through the information or it doesn't. Okay, let's return to our cocktail party. Again, probably a phenomenon a lot of you have already experienced. So let's suppose, or look at this scene. So we have these two people here, let's say Edward and Betty, and they are in a conversation with each other and are really engaged and speak to each other. Now we have this third person, let's say he's John. And John is in this conversation, but in this conversation he drops Edward's name. Something like, last week I went golfing with Edward, and so forth. What is very likely to happen now? Sorry? That he notices that his name is being dropped. How could that be explained in Broadbent's early selection model?
Salience, because it's a trigger.
Well, Broadbent would be strict and say no, if you put by top down your attention here then, but if it's very salient, yeah, then probably yes. But is it really salient? How far do you have to process Edward to say, oh, that's a salient thing? Is it like a loud bang or bright flash?
It's probably automated because of the familiarity of it.
Well, it's language, so you have to actually do language processing. If you remember in the shadowing task, people in the unattended channel didn't notice a change from one language to another, from male to female. So it's filtered out very early. There seems to be no processing of language. So this salient stimuli, that referred more to these, a loud bang or, somebody running in, so motion coming into the field. He actually can't. So this finding is inconsistent with Broadbent's model.
So does that mean that he says that salient features can only be naturally come about? Because if I hear the characteristic sound, so the sound structure of my name an awful lot, could it not become salient by virtue of every time I hear it, it necessarily would prompt a response?
I'm not sure. Usually I think it is still thought, yet you have to attach a semantic meaning to that. It's not the plain sound pattern. The reason for this is that if it would be a very plain sound pattern, it would be probably specific to a speaker for the same pitch and everything. If you really have like a sound signature which you could open in an audio editor and say that's really the same shape. But with different speakers you have different speeds, pitches and everything. So it can't be a too low level sound signature of that. Okay, so yeah, it can't be explained. And that's the reason why then Treisman later on built upon that model and made it a little bit more complex. And that's a typical thing which often happens in science. You have a phenomenon, you start with a very basic theory, you encounter findings which don't fit the theory, so you try to extend the theory and make it more explicit. So that is Anne Treisman, and that's her husband, Daniel Kahneman, and that he always gives me hope. He's, to my knowledge, the only psychologist who ever won a Nobel Prize. So there is hope. In economics, by the way, on the topic on decision making. So how do people behave and make decisions, which is highly relevant to things like stock market and corporates and management. Okay, so her model is based on Broadbent's filter model. However, it introduces one change, and that is that the mechanism for filtering is different. And Broadbent suggested an all or nothing filter, while Treisman suggested a more gradual working attenuator. So that's the key difference between the two models. So just to recap, this was Broadbent's model. And this is Treisman's model. So it's basically the beginning is the same. In Broadbent we have a selective filter, and in Treisman's model we have an attenuating filter. Again, working based on physical properties, using the same thing. However, what she's saying is that the unattended message is just attenuated very strongly, but is passed forward to some initial processing. Now the question is, or she proposes that under certain circumstances, this attenuated message may become the focus of attention, like when somebody else drops our name in the background. And she said that this can happen if this message, in a theoretical way, exceeds a threshold of activation. And how can you get such a high threshold? Well, this can be put in place by context and priming, by subjective importance, such as your own name, and the degree of attenuation. That means how strongly we focus. So it might also happen, or it is also not the case, that you would always hear your name. If you are very, very engaged in a discussion, you may actually miss it, or you're more likely to miss it. So, and in that case, the attenuated message becomes the focus of attention and is processed. However, what she would propose is that you really switch then, and the attenuated, the unattended message becomes the attended, and the other one is filtered out. So it's still the case that there is only one message which is fully analyzed. But her model accounts for the fact that some other stimuli around us, when they are very salient, can take over and become the focus of attention. But as soon as they do, we filter out the other one. Yes?
This also, this unplanned interruption also accounts for the fact that it's difficult to return to a subject that's been interrupted.
That's a different thing. This has more to do with short-term memory and task switching. So that you forgot where you have been in that task, which you had to interrupt and stop, and then you have to recollect it from memory to re-engage and reinitiate the other task. So it is an early selection model like Broadbent's model, and has this option that the unattended information may become the attended and thus aware information. And again, all other information decays early in the sensory memory. So Broadbent as well as Treisman would very strongly propose that unattended information can have no effect on behavior. Behavior is only affected by information we become aware of. That means information we attend to. Okay, so this was that, and of course it doesn't take too long until somebody else says, well, no, I think it's different. And Deutsch and Deutsch and Norman proposed what is called late selection models. And as the name suggests, you may expect what they did. They proposed that all incoming information is fully analyzed for meaning. That means if you are at a party, then everything which you can physically understand in your vicinity, you would process for meaning up to the full level. And then only in a late stage, based on physical properties and or the meaning, we select what then actually is put into memory and we remember and so forth. So in this model, it is easy to explain why we hear our name in the background. So when we think about this, the advantage of this model is when this will be really the truth, then it's great. We wouldn't miss any important information. So for our survival, that could be really a good thing. However, who could see a disadvantage with that model?
If we are constantly attending to all information, sometimes something that's really important will get missed on.
We may miss the real important information.
Does it not assume semantic content in the sense that if you listen to everything and semantically analyze, you'd be semantically analyzing things that actually have no intended meaning or actual meaning?
Well, they do have meaning, don't they? You mean that you confuse that, or?
I mean that there'd be things that you normally wouldn't pay attention to ever, that you will never before brought into the attentional space, such as background noise, which we constantly hear, that you would now have to analyse, unless they say the background noise wouldn't be analysed, in which case you say, so you've ruled something out, in which case the filter doesn't work yet.
I'm afraid I don't fully get your point. The idea is you would just fully analyse everything for meaning. And it doesn't matter. You could listen to a conversation where you have no clue what it's all about, but you could still just listen to it, and maybe you don't know what they are speaking about, but still it could be processed to the level of semantics. So, okay. It would be extremely resource demanding. We would need to be able to decode a couple of conversations at the same time.
I think this might be part of the explanation of why the cocktail party effect doesn't work on me, because I've had tinnitus for 25 years. So I think I'm having to allocate a lot of resources to actually overcoming the effects of tinnitus.
Yeah, yeah. So, of course, if there is like problems on the early sensory input, then these models may work in a different way, in a very general sense. Okay, so slightly different schematic representation. Broadbent's model, we have early attentional selection, all or nothing. Treisman, early selection but attenuation, and late selection is we process everything and then we make a selection only at a very late stage. Okay, so I would like to briefly go through that last bit and then we will do a break in a moment. So, who has heard the name James Vickery? Nobody. But I'm pretty sure you all have heard what he did in the 1950s. He was the one who, in movie theaters, put in subliminal messages into the movie. Something like drink Coke, eat popcorn, and stuff. So subliminal means it's below threshold of perception. So if you ask people, have you seen something? Or can you tell me what you've seen or heard? Then people will say no. They were not able to see that. Okay, let's have a look at this clip. There is, oh.
Drink Coca-Cola into a movie and
sorry.
Can you subconsciously influence people with subliminal messages? In 1957, marketeer James Vickery inserted the words eat popcorn and drink Coca-Cola into a movie in a New Jersey cinema. Too short for the audience to notice, but long enough for the subconscious to pick up. Vickery claimed significant increase in popcorn and Coke.
Okay. So Vickery claimed significant increase. True or urban myth? Oh, I have to activate the poll again. So your opinion. So if you flicker something up very briefly in a movie theater without people noticing, can you increase the sales of certain product? Just, or the question?
Did they just do it once or did they do multiple times?
Oh, multiple times. Many times throughout the whole movie. Sorry? Oh. Is it? I still haven't activated it. Okay. Is it now coming on? Okay. Okay, let's have a look. 83% think it's working, 17% think it's not working. Okay, so that actually tells me that you didn't look at the lecture slides. And that's a good thing. So to go through that, it's actually, I think for your own interest, better to not look at all the slides before everything. Okay, let's have a look. So the truth is, no, it doesn't work. So with these type of subliminal stimuli, it doesn't work. When we now go back to the attentional models, if you say it does work, which model would have a problem and with which model would it be in agreement? Early selection, which filters out everything which we don't attend to at a very early stage? No, because it's filtered out very early, so it can't influence us. It would require a late selection model, because it's the proposition, the idea is that unattended and unaware information affects our behavior. And this is in disagreement with early selection models, but in agreement with late selection models. So put it just on one slide again, that's what Vickery did. So I think he did it for 0.3 milliseconds, so extremely brief and short. However, you can still pick that up if you do it in another setting and not in a movie context. So our visual system is capable of actually taking that up every 5 seconds. And he reported that the sales increased by 18 or 58% depending on the product. However, he ran his own marketing company and he just wanted to boost his business. The results were faked. So it's not true.
What about propaganda?
Yeah, so in general, this type of subliminal priming doesn't work in that way. If we go broader and say, well, subliminal persuasion in general, there you have examples which actually can work. And a really nice read, given it's a scientific article, is this paper by John Bartsch, The Unbearable Automaticity of Being. And they come from a slightly different context of social sciences. And they do studies like inviting participants into the lab, pretending to have another test, like a short-term memory test where they have to learn word lists. And what they manipulate are what are the words in the word lists. And some prime stereotypes of elderly, like in Florida, retirement and everything, and some don't. And what they then measured, how do you get this idea? How long did it take the participants to walk from the lab to the exit of the building? And if you prime the elderly stereotype, people walk slower. And they do stuff like that, and so it's really, really interesting and funny to read. So there are other ways, or there are some ways where subliminal information can get actually through to us. Yes?
We talk about the contemporary politicians using language to instill fear in the population to achieve their ends.
Well, yes, I mean, when I look this up, there is even clips which claim that the American government has put in subliminal messages in some of their, playing the national anthem, and then something like trust in God, do not criticize the government, and things like that. I don't know whether it's fake or whether it has really been done, but let me put it like this. It's not that easy like this. But under certain circumstances, subliminal persuasion can work. But I would like to stay here in the realms of cognitive psychology and models of attention. And with that, I think okay, yes. I'm sorry, I'm not at my best today. I just came down with the flu and I'm just still recovering, so a bit mushy in my head. So basically, the question is, did Vickery's finding therefore disprove the late selection models? Because it didn't work or not. And after the break, we will look at a bit more scientific study of that. So let's have a break now and continue after the break. Okay, so I mean, Vickery's experiment, let's call it, in the movie theaters, of course, wasn't a proper scientific investigation. So let's have a look at one of the key studies in that area on subliminal priming, published by Dehane in 1998. I think it was in Nature. So the participants sat in front of the computer and had to do the following task. Very simple. They just saw a number on the screen between 1 and 9, and if the number was larger than 5, press the right button. If it's smaller than 5, press the left button. So really an easy and difficult, easy, not difficult task. This is the so-called target stimulus where they have to respond to. However, what they did in addition to that was that they presented a prime before that. And this prime could either require the same response, like in this example, but it's also above 5. Now this wouldn't be now very tricky because you see the prime very easily with these timings. So what they did was they masked the prime so that participants were not able to report what this number was. So they couldn't say, yeah, I saw 9, and then it happened. The example of an incongruent trial is like this. They present a 1, which is smaller than 5, and 6, which is larger than 5. So if that prime is processed, it should affect our response times. If it's congruent, we should be faster, because that primed us already, and here it should be slower, because it primed the wrong answer when the target finally came up. And what he found is, indeed, a congruency effect. So the solid line are the incongruent trials, and these are the congruent trials. So if it's congruent, you are faster. So in this experiment, a subliminal, a non-conscious, non-aware stimulus affected our response time, so our behavior. What is also very interesting about this study, that he varied the notation. And when you look here, it's a verbal, a written word, and here it's the alphanumeric number 6. So it can't be a simple perceptual priming. People must have read the word and encoded it semantically. So there was really high-level processing of the prime stimulus. So this is evidence in favor of priming. And there have been many experiments of this nature with different stimuli, numbers, letters, arrows, shapes, whatever, and they all confirm it's very robust, it really works well. However, James Vickery's stuff did not work. So what's the difference here? And the difference is that in these experimental paradigms, like Dehane's, the participants sit in front of the computer and they set up their mind to respond to a number as quickly as possible. So they prepare a certain behavior in response to something happening in the environment. And what also happens is that the prime and the actual behavior are very close to each other in time. It's usually less than a second, often just a couple of 100 milliseconds between the prime, the target, and then the actual response. And this is a prerequisite for it to be successful. If the prime does not relate to our current behavioral goals, it is ineffective. So suppose you do a study like this. You don't present a number, but you say left or right for left or right hand. Maybe you get a tiny effect because it's left or right hand, but it will be much smaller than the other one, and I would dare to speculate that you probably don't get an effect at all. And here, you surely don't get any effect, because this has nothing to do with your current behavioral goals and would be far too in the distance, in the future. And I know, for instance, of a project, it was a student project actually, but they had a lot of participants, I think over 100 or 120 participants, where they tried exactly this with like 2 types of chocolate bars, and in the end they just offer that to the participants and say, okay, as a thank you, you can take one of the chocolate bars. And half an hour intensive subliminal priming didn't make any difference what chocolate bar they picked. So it doesn't work that easily. So that's the difference between the lab situation and the real world. Okay, so we have evidence for early selection models. It's very clear, the shadowing task and the Sherry's paradigm. Information of unattended channels is not really retained. People do not pick that up. Think of the door study. If we really would process all the information up to a high level of semantic meaning, how would that door study be possible? That we don't see when the person in front of us changes. However, at the same time, we have evidence for late selection models. So that subliminal stimuli are processed for their meaning. Now this is really conflicting evidence, and most people might find that confusing. So I would like to have a little exercise, which takes a little bit longer, and I would like to really engage you in that, so that you take some learning out of that and not just chat about the latest news or something. So please team up in pairs of 2 people. You just have to speak to each other, so it can be across rows as well. And the first one first explains Broadbent's early selection model to the other one. And that is quite a challenging task and really requires you or tests you whether you properly understood that. Afterwards, the other person explains the late selection model proposed by Deutsch and Deutsch back. And try to get into a discussion. When somebody says, well, I really didn't understand that properly, then that you try to solve that together, what was unclear. And then try to find a solution to this problem that we have evidence for both. And they are somewhat mutually exclusive. When something is filtered early, it can't be at the same time filtered late. So, which model is correct? You may get into a discussion and say, I'm the early selection guy, so that is the correct model, and I will tell you. Or maybe they're both correct, or maybe they're both incorrect. So try to work with that information and try to get a solution. And I would like to give you like 5 to 10 minutes to that, so really try to work that and get in depth. If you encounter questions which you can't resolve, please post them to Poll Everywhere. That's very useful for me for future years to see where I may have to focus on a little bit better. And now I actually do remember to turn on the poll. Okay. Okay, give it a shot. Okay, let's slowly come to an end. It is really very good to hear that the models of attention are actually that funny. So, okay. Do you have any urgent questions which came out of that discussion? Okay, can you refocus your attention, please? Topic of today, attention, maybe a keyword which is salient towards you. Okay, good. Okay, so any questions on this? Okay, in total brutal honesty, did you find that useful or not as an exercise? Who found it useful? Hands up. Okay, a couple of hands. Okay, good. So we may do that at some points again later. So don't complain, you said it was useful. And okay, so we can have a look at the results and see whether there are some more banana comments. Okay, yes, you can sleep now, but you can also do that at home. You don't have to come here. Okay. How late in selection do we have to process stimulus for it to affect our action? Well, until the full semantic processing, until the processing for meaning, where it then affects our information.
That was my question to you, but what I was thinking was, so it doesn't, even if you process it semantically, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to affect our behavior. Or
it does not necessarily mean it does affect our behavior, no. It just means the semantic information of that stimulus is somewhere in our system. But if it's, for instance, totally irrelevant to our current behavior, it may not actually influence our behavior.
what kind of,
But it has a potential to influence our behavior.
and what's the thing that triggers, like, what is the thing that bridges
Bridges what?
makes the semantic information then affect our behavior? What's the difference?
If it's relevant for our behavior, so like in the example with the numbers, if there's a subconscious number lingering around and I have to use a number to respond to something, then it interferes. Yes. Are the physical properties the only things that make information attended to in the later models? Now in the late selection, it is physical properties and meaning. So that's how it would explain that we notice our name in the background, because it can be both physical properties and meaning which can be used. When is early or late selection relevant? Does time have an effect on this? Time in which sense? Because it's a continuous process. In every moment we process that. But maybe we will answer that when we know. Go on. Okay. So which model is correct? And the answer is that actually maybe both are correct. And we sometimes take one or the other. So, yes?
Does this mean that Treisman has been ruled out, or
No, Treisman hasn't been ruled out. So it's probably Treisman versus Deutsch Deutsch, if you want to say so. But the Broadbent is a little bit easier to deal with. Let's just put them collectively in the category of early selection models versus late selection models. Sorry if that hasn't been clear. So, yes?
we actually hypothesized that the late selection model comes top down and the early selection one bottom up. So the two will meet, but it's in a dynamic fashion.
Okay, it's not really like this. And it hasn't been proposed like this as well, that in late selection, because it can happen on physical properties as well in a bottom-up way. So, okay. So, yeah, maybe sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. But what determines what is early and what is late? And this was really a great step forward in this discussion, because there were really like two separate communities in the attention literature which were kind of fighting about what is correct, late or early, and they were both producing evidence supporting their view. And then Nillie Lavie from the UCL here in London did a really, really ingenious study to solve that problem. I mean, in itself, it's not perfect again, can be criticized as well, but at least it can explain quite a bit of data. And this is called the theory of perceptual load, or in brief, load theory. And the idea is, when the task is very difficult, then we behave differently as compared to an easy task. So a difficult task, for instance, could be to find a very specific DVD among a lot of other DVDs. Then we really have to go down there and search and search. And this requires a lot of attentional resources. And because we need all these resources for the search task, we select early and filter out everything which is irrelevant early, so that we have all resources available for our search. However, if we have an easy task at hand, for instance, we want to find a DVD among a lot of books, which really stands out very easily, then this task doesn't demand a lot of attentional resources. So we can spare attentional resources and afford late selection. We can process further stimuli for that. And of course, she has conducted not only one, but by now a lot of experiments which supported that view. So let's have a look at one of her key experiments she did. The task, again, very easy. You see a letter on the screen, either in Z or in X. If it's an X, press the left finger, Z, right finger, as quickly as possible. Now what she added to that were so-called distractor stimuli, like the X and the P. And they were not relevant to the task. Participants knew only the central letter is relevant. And these distractors could be either incompatible with the response, so Z is right finger and X would propose left finger, or they could be neutral, like a P, not associated with any response. Now when you do that, you see a kind of priming effect. Now it's not priming in that sense, but it seems the distractor is processed, because if it's incompatible, then you are slower than when this letter is neutral. And this can only be explained if you process the AX, it's incompatible with that, you get interference, so you slow down. So this is the easy task, the low load condition. Now she also used a difficult task. And in this task, your target letter was somewhere hidden in a string of 6 letters. So here you have your Z, here you have your X. And again, you have incompatible and neutral. So this is high load. It's a difficult task. And what happens is the distractor is not processed anymore. So this looks like late selection. You process everything on the screen, and this is early selection. You just focus what you need to, and you filter out everything you don't need to in the difficult task. So suddenly, I mean, overall, you're of course slower because you have a more difficult task, but the distractor does not have an effect anymore. So this experiment provides support for the idea that depending on the load we have, we choose different ways to filter out information. If it's easy task, late. If it's a difficult task, early. Okay, so to summarize, we have seen now a lot of models just to have them on one screen again. Early selection model by Broadbent, it's an all or nothing, completely filtered out early in the processing. Then Treisman went on, built upon this, proposed the Attenuator Model, where we say unattended information is attenuated in early processing, so not fully filtered out. Then we had the late selection models, which basically proposed all information is processed. It is filtered out only late in the processing. And then we have the theory of perceptual load by Lavie, which basically says selection is early in difficult tasks and late in easy tasks. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, then let's go on to automaticity. And this time I had to go back, way back in history of films, The Great Escape from 1963. Who knows that movie? Oh, even more people than Becca Vance. That's just surprising. Okay, so it's about Americans who are in a German prisoners of war, Second World War, and they try to escape. And they prepare for that. And for their journey through Germany, they think, okay, they can't speak English, obviously. So if they would learn German, they would have this very obvious American accent. So what they did, they learned French, so that their American accent would go unnoticed, hopefully. That's their idea. So they actually did escape, and they tried to get their way out of Germany by taking a bus. And they are held up by the German military or secret police, how to translate that. Again, there's no sound.
Staatspolizei, den Ausweis bitte. En français. D'abord. Commençons. Oui. Parlez-vous français? Un peu. Votre accent est très bon. Non, je l'ai tout fait dans l'école supérieure. C'est bien. Passez. Merci. Au revoir, monsieur. What? Au revoir. Good luck. Thank you.
Okay. And the story goes on, and wild chases and everything. What happened?
He responded in English when he spoke to English?
Yeah, it was just an automatic reply. So let's have a look. What's the difference between controlled processing and automatic processing? And this is just a list of a lot of things. And what could you think of? What is the difference between controlled and automatic?
Could you say controlled is more coming from internal goals, like internally, automatic's more response to external?
Control more internal, automatic more external. Yeah, maybe a little bit. But it can be internal automatic as well. Yeah.
Like voluntary or involuntary?
Voluntary versus involuntary, yeah.
The automatic would be habitual.
Automatic is habitual. What do you think about the speed of things? What is slow? Controlled is slow, automatic is fast. Flexibility? Controlled, flexible, automatic, yes. So, and linking to the topic of today, controlled requires attention, and automatic does not require attention. Controlled has limited capacity, so we only can focus our attention on one thing, as we just learned today. Automatic has unlimited capacity. It's rather slow versus fast. This one, it links a little bit here into the attention bit, can be considered effortful, while automatic is effortless. Controlled is aware and conscious. Automatic is outside awareness. Typically, we may become aware during the act, but often the initial choosing of the behavior is automatic, is outside of our awareness. And yeah, controllable, uncontrollable. Well, of course, you can exert a certain amount of control over that. So, for instance, if he would have been more attentive, this guy on the bus, he could have suppressed his English response. So, but it's not always the case. For instance, you can't present a word on the screen and I can't ask you, please do not read that. That's not possible. If you look there, you have read it already. Flexible versus inflexible. And some theories say, okay, this is really a duality. Something is either controlled or automatic, nothing in between. Or other theories would say, well, it's a gradual transition between automatic and controlled. So let's have examples. Walking, we say is controlled or automatic? Automatic?
I would say first controlled and then automatic as you learn.
Yes.
Developmentally.
It is, if you learn as a child, highly controlled, or if you, for instance, lose a limb, have to relearn it, then it can be controlled again. Driving a car, if you're an experienced driver, probably automatic. At least a lot of the components are automatic, like shifting gears, for instance. However, you probably very vividly remember your first driving lessons, and this is very far from automatic. It's highly controlled, usually. Okay, so the question is, how does an activity become automatic? Practice, somebody? Yeah, practice.
Until it's perfect enough to be...
Until it's perfect?
Otherwise, it's a matter of it being reliable. If it's not, if the outcome isn't reliable, it won't become automatic.
If the outcome isn't reliable, it won't become automatic. Yes, in a way, yes. You must trust your system that it produces the behavior you need to show. So yes, it's practice, a lot of practice. But what are the mental mechanisms? I would like to briefly present two of those. Schneider and Schifrin suggested that both are based on the same mental processes, but that practice makes this process more efficient. So with their theory, would you think they would say, well, automatic and controlled behavior are two distinct things, or is it a gradual transition?
Is it gradual?
Yes. They would propose it's gradual, because you make one and the same thing more and more efficient over time. However, Gordon Logan proposed what he called the instance theory of automaticity, which is slightly different. He said there is a shift of strategy in how a task is performed. And in the beginning, we use controlled processing, and later on automatic, and these are different cognitive processes. When we are not practiced, we use more general algorithms to solve problems, which is controlled. And later on, he would say automaticity is just memory retrieval. We have ingrained them so much that we have stored the solutions in our long-term memory and can just retrieve that. And he gives an example of multiplication, and that theory is very well founded in schools, for instance. That's the reason why certain emphasis is put on certain learning outcomes, like learning the tables in number tables. So multiplication of 5 times 4. And initially, you have to sum the 5 4 times. So you have to say 5 plus 5 is 10, plus 5 is 15, plus 5 is 20. So this is a controlled and effortful process. It's slow. But if you learn the number tables later on, you just know 5 times 4 is 20. You retrieve the solution immediately from your long-term memory automatically and can go on with that. The same way as we probably 5 plus 5 is 10, yeah. In the beginning you have to say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you see there, you can build it up stepwise. And so that Logan would say that the difference between automatic and non-automatic behavior is just knowledge base. If it's automatic, it's as knowledge in our long-term memory.
With things like if someone pinches you, most people, as example, say ouch.
Yes.
How does that link into the practice of it? Because that's kind of an instance.
Yes, that is a good question. You usually don't have to learn ouch as a behavior.
That's automatic, isn't it? It's an automatic response.
It's an automatic response to that, yes. You want to answer?
I think that it flips between the two. That if the automatic response doesn't come back, for example, 7/8 was a difficult multiplication for me, then you fall back to doing it the difficult way, control way.
I'm not sure I fully got that, I'm sorry. But while you were saying, I had the chance to think myself, so thank you for that. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, so just trying to think back. I wouldn't say it's automatic right from the beginning. I would actually say you have to learn it from other people. So it's probably not, the natural response would be crying, but that is just a crying which happens, which is probably inbuilt, pain, crying. And saying ouch, instead, you see that somewhere else, you learn that, you do that, and then children learn when I say ouch, when I bump myself, somebody attends to me, and so probably there is a practice and learning effect involved, yeah.
Can automaticity also be impulsiveness?
Impulsiveness?
Yes, acting without thinking.
In a way, probably yes. And certain personality behaviors are linked with which is called disinhibition, so that you act automatically out your behavior without controlling it in a way. So I would say there is a link. I am not sure, I'm sure there are studies, but I don't know the outcomes, which link certain personality traits to your ability to inhibit something, like automatic responses. There are certain tasks, like the stop signal task, which are then linked to impulsivity or ADHD in children and things like that. So it's exactly Gordon Logan who developed this stop signal task and applied it to children and the diagnosis of ADHD, for instance. Okay, we're coming to an end. I'm a little bit mindful of time. So, and we are actually coming here to an end as well. So, automaticity bears certain dangers. One very trivial thing is that you often run an autopilot and may just forget certain things. Like you run the same day, same way to work, and next morning you say, oh yeah, friend of mine, I will pick you up and take you with me. And then you arrive at work and say, oh my God, yeah, he's still standing there out on the street and waiting on me, because you're just certain automaticity. Well, there's a reason why in London that is painted so often on the streets, because all the tourists automatically look to the wrong side and just step in front of on the street, and the car is coming from the other side. And I do remember when I learned to drive in the UK. And in the beginning, it is a total horror. Then after a short time, it gets a little bit better. In a controlled fashion, you can learn. And then comes a very, very dangerous period. And that is when the left-hand driving starts to become automatic. And you don't pay attention. And the automatic left-hand driving sometimes still mixes with the automatic driving on the right side of the road, the correct side of the road. And so I had really one or two dangerous situations, because just by reflex I suddenly occasionally looked into the wrong direction when I was turning or something like that. And then something like highway hypnosis, like in the US, where you can go for hundreds of miles straight on, and people just say, well, actually, I can't remember anything from the last hour. I was just driving in autopilot and my thoughts were somewhere else. So keep that in mind. Okay, so just please, one last point I would like to make in the summary is that automaticity is an extremely beneficial and purposeful thing, because it takes off a lot of resources from us. Suppose we would have to attentively control everything, like moving around, picking something up, speaking. All that thing would need our attention. That would be impossible to do. So it's really, really a great thing that we can make so many things automatic. Sometimes it bears a little danger, but overall we couldn't live without that. Okay, thanks a lot, and we had, I think, a lot of questions, and see you next week's time. Sorry again for being so late. Better time myself.